I wanted to read you guys a text message that I received many years back and read you the community post that I wrote about these text messages a few months ago. This one on the left is my landlord and the one on the right is my neighbor. Hello, hope all's well. There's a package in the hallway visible from the street. The front door has been broken twice by someone trying to steal the packages left in the doorway. Please keep the doorway and hallway clear at all times. Thanks. Me. I'll stop getting stuff delivered then if they're stealing it faster than I can get to it. Let's talk about getting a camera put out front. I have some high quality cameras if you can help me install from back when we installed cameras and may deter this stuff. What do you think if I could find a good high-res vandal-proof camera we can put in the front for you and a machine to put in the basement to record to? I just need someone to help me run a wire. My landlord. Do you watch the news? People murder, rape, and burglarize with cameras recording everything. Cameras don't stop desperate people. And then on the right, my neighbor, who after 15 years, can't spell my fucking name right. Hey, Lois, I had a package that was delivered on Saturday that I never got from Ancestry.com. Did you by chance grab with your packages? I never saw it. I'll double check my boxes when I get back. They lost my soap Sunday too. Yeah, lost. In that neighborhood, God only knows. Thank you. Hey, man, can you please take your boxes from downstairs and not leave the heavy ones in the foyer so people don't try to crowbar the door again? Thank you. Me. My apologies. I've been getting home late and got lazy carrying them upstairs. When I'm tired, I'll bring them all up tonight. No problem, he says. And me. The thieves will be disappointed when all they find is generic cat litter. Because that was what was in the boxes. On to my community post. My image software, Image, will remind me of what I was doing 3 or 5 or 10 years ago with images from that time period in the top bar. Today's two are funny. The left is a message from my landlord. The right one is from my neighbor. No malice. It's all love. These two are great people. This is what it was like to live in a $2,200 a month studio apartment in New York City. Backstory. I got home late from work around 2 to 4 a.m. regularly after that CBC News piece came out about our business. People would see boxes in the foyer and try to smash the door to get them because those boxes had tape with Amazon logos on them. Amazon tape? It must be gold inside was their thought process if I had to guess. If the box arrived at 11 a.m. that day, I was already at work. If I stayed overnight, which happens sometimes, more than sometimes at that point in my life, I wouldn't get home to bring the box of cat litter upstairs until 1 p.m. the next day. So the box of cat litter sat downstairs, visible to passerbys in the foyer, until I got home to pick it up. The two doors between the foyer and the outside had a small bit of window. These upstanding citizens walking by who would break the door to get the Amazon box clearly hadn't watched my videos on Amazon product quality. This was cat litter, not even the good stuff. It wasn't Arm & Hammer, Dr. Elsie's, or Fresh Step. It was generic cheap shit. I was trolling with the camera response. I know damn well that it won't do shit. It was my roundabout way of getting my landlord to say out loud that we pay $2,200 a month to live in a shithole. I think it was my subconscious way of getting reinforcement that it's time to get the fuck out of here. People broke doors for Amazon boxes with generic cat litter, Ancestry.com packages so my neighbor could tell where he's from almost every day that there was a box there. I had that apartment for 12 years, and I lived in that neighborhood for about 14. Clinton's cat litter was never safe, even behind two locked doors, because those doors could be smashed at any time, all for an Amazon box. Good times. Good times. I'm not being sarcastic when I say those two words. Those were good times. Living in New York City for my adult life was a fun 14 years. I would have never built the business I did anywhere else without 8.5 million people from all walks of life and finances crammed into that tiny space. I would have never gotten so many positive experiences that made me who I am, for better or for worse, without growing up in New York City. Since I first moved away from my parents as a teenager, I had lived in the same neighborhood. I stayed in that neighborhood for almost 15 years and kept that apartment for 12, starting out with a $400 apartment, $700, $1,100, and then a $1,750 apartment as my permanent home. That apartment went up to $2,200 12 years later. When I started out, I was completely broke. Towards the end, I had a store and 12 to 16 employees. It didn't matter how I was doing financially. I kept that apartment and stayed in that neighborhood. Living where I did meant I never had to listen to yuppie Karens next door who would complain about my music or me walking up the steps at 2 a.m. and making noise. I could blast Gap Band or Terry Callier on a refurbished set of Vandersteen speakers at 1 a.m. and I knew I wasn't bothering anybody because my neighbor downstairs was doing the same thing. We had an unspoken mutual understanding. I will never bitch about your noise and you will never bitch about mine. It was lovely. In other neighborhoods with the yuppies, the Karens, the people who all already knew each other and excluded me from their circles almost immediately, I would have been reminded every day that I wasn't one of them and that I didn't fit into their world. I didn't fit into this one either, but I always felt closer to them than I did to the people who would, with time, from a financial perspective, become my peers. I started as a teenager who was a nobody. I did my tech work for customers at a Herald Square Park, running and hiding an extension cord to a New York City electrical outlet used for bands that played special events in the park. I did this with the stealth of Snake from Metal Gear Solid so I wouldn't get caught by park authorities because I couldn't afford a $250 WeWork office. 12 years later, I had a proper store and 1 million YouTube subscribers, but I stayed living in that same neighborhood. Ideologues on one side of the political aisle who overdose on their chosen newscaster, who repeats to them what they want to hear, who hammer home the same narrative every night, will mention the ridiculousness of the crime that we all came to accept as a reality of daily life. Yet they always fail to mention the counterpoint. Where else in the world can a teenager with $260 in his pocket and $1,000 in credit card debt build a business out of a park? Not just any business, but one that become world-renowned, featured on national news with a line of customers. Out of a park. For a short period of time, I was known and believed to be one of the best at my craft. This came as a result of the experience I was able to gain from the high volume and density of jobs that people were open to leaving with someone who had no reputation or experience outside of a short internship at Avatar Studios working alongside Phil Lipscomb, Gretchen Mathwich, Ricky Began, and Roy Hendrickson. Greats, by the way. I owe them all of my success. But anyway. As things grew from the nobody in a park to a real store, I didn't take the influencer path so many in that position did to impress the audience, so I could film videos in front of my floor-to-ceiling glass in my $4,000 apartment in gentrified Williamsburg or Park Slope. It seemed like a waste of time and resources. I was used to where I lived, and with the passage of time, I became conditioned to it. Receiving these text messages weren't viewed as a problem for me that required that I move to the East or West Village or Midtown Manhattan. Rather, they were the hallmarks of everyday life. To move away would mean letting the people who stole my cat litter win, moving next to the yuppies that looked down on me for my entire adult life. To move away from my home would mean losing a place where I could blast my Vandersteen Model 3 speakers at 3 a.m. without bothering my neighbor because he was doing the same thing. I didn't want to leave my home. It didn't matter how many subscribers I had. It didn't matter that the district attorney was bringing high-profile cases to us for data recovery, or that we were featured in CBC News, that I had a line out the door in a business with 16 employees. I remember what it was like to be the kid working out of the park, hiding his extension cord from Herald Square Park employees, soldering and plugging notebook chargers into a 6-tap strip at my table that I'd hide underneath my bag, trying to build something from nothing, while those people looking down on me as they went to fancy colleges with daddy's money moved into what I would call a fishbowl apartment. Fancy ceiling to floor glass, new appliances, $4,000 a month back in 2009, the size of the koi fish pond in my current backyard. Looking back, the reason I didn't leave my home when I could clearly afford to came down to identity. It didn't matter how different we seemed. I knew one thing for a fact. While the person stealing my cat litter in my neighbor's Ancestry.com package may seem like a bum, they never looked down on me. In my early days, I was far closer to their position at the starting line than I was to the people who were supposed to be my peers, which made me feel far more comfortable living there. I felt far closer to the person stealing my cat litter than I did to the yuppies in Murray Hill, Park Slope, Dumbo, or Williamsburg. I knew why I lived there, and I knew why I stayed. I wouldn't recommend this experience for everyone. It's not for everyone. Putting up a camera was considered a waste of time, since it wouldn't be a deterrent to the type of person who attempts to break through 2 security doors to steal cat litter. Only a Karen would think it makes sense to report these crimes. To report this crime sent a message to the world that you have no self-awareness of where you are. Culturally, it was understood to be petty to report things like this. It was understood to be a waste of time. The police had nothing to go on since there were no cameras. My landlord knew that installing cameras was a waste of time and effort, even if I used my own money and set them up for free. The person being recorded likely had 5 bench warrants on them anyway, and didn't live at the address on their ID if they even had one. Even if they did, what NYPD cop is going to waste their time tracking down the Ancestry.com cat litter thief? Where I live now, I've accidentally left a box with an e-bike motor kit, fish pond stuff, and stuff for other hobbies. This stuff wasn't cheap. $600 e-bike stuff for $1,000 of koi pond equipment. Those boxes had logos on them that made it clear what was inside was expensive, and they were in plain sight. Nobody touched my packages. None of my packages have been touched in the 2 years I've lived here. If a window was broken on this block, it would be reported to the sheriff who was right down the street. He knows everyone here and sometimes visits the DPF delete guy down the street. He enjoys the local bar where bands come every Friday and Saturday to play. I always laugh every time someone brings up the low crime rate and statistics, while failing to understand the culture that places a stigma on reporting crime. The amount of crap I never reported to the NYPD would make for a stack of paper only exceeded by official New York City and New York State mail for unjustified fines and audits I receive on a regular basis. I know this for a fact. I'm in a different stage of life now. This life is no longer for me. I'm not kidding when I say it might be for you. What ideologues on one side of the political spectrum fail to realize when pointing out crime in cities is that it is worth it for some people to experience the opportunity that doesn't happen anywhere else. Above all, what they fail to consider are people like me, who identified far more with the Bed-Stuy or East New York crook than with the Park Slope Karen. At least the crook didn't look down on me. Good times. Mark Longo, the owner of the Instagram famous squirrel Peanut, is mourning the loss of his beloved pet. On November 1st, Longo took to Instagram to reveal that Peanut had been euthanized, along with a pet raccoon named Fred, by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Despite our passionate outcry for compassion, the agency chose to ignore our pleas, leaving us in deep shock and grief, he said online. In light of the news, Congressman Nick Langworthy took to Twitter to express his frustration at how the DEC handled the situation. He said the New York State DEC needs a serious reality check on their ridiculously mistaken priorities. Instead of focusing on critical needs like flood mitigation in places like Steuben County, where local officials have to struggle just to get permits from the DEC to clear debris-filled waterways, they're out seizing pet squirrels. And that's the point here. I don't lead the life of an influencer. I don't do videos outside of my 80th floor apartment so that you could see the view in the background. I spent 3 years living around East New York and 12 years living in Bed-Stuy before gentrification. I don't complain about the crime. I laugh at it, but I don't complain about it. That being said, what gets me about New York, it's not what they do, it's what they choose to focus on. For 15 years, I could not keep cat litter in my foyer. I'm not talking about leaving a box there for a week. I'm talking about it being left there for a day. If a box was left in the foyer of my apartment building where I lived, where I called home for $2,200 a fucking month, it got stolen. But somebody has a squirrel in their house. They went into the man's house. They took his squirrel and they killed him because he didn't have a license. The license had been expired and he was in the process of getting a new one. Are they correct to do that? Let's take a look and see. New York State codes, rules, and regulations. Animals dangerous to health or welfare. Canines, raccoons, dog of the species. I went to a New York public school, bro. I can't pronounce this shit. Wolverine, badgers, raccoons in the, New York, back to the New York public school shit. Skunks, bears, cats in the family, all non-human primates in the order primates, elephants, rhinoceros, bats, crocodilians, the following species in family, not a squirrel. The following species in family, not a squirrel. The following species in not a squirrel. All reptiles that are venomous by nature. And venomous lizards. Not a squirrel. Not a squirrel. Next, let's take a look at this one. This is 2.14, reporting of suspected rabid animals and persons exposed to them. Whenever in accordance with this section, the local health authority is notified of a person who has been exposed to any dog, cat, ferret, or domestic livestock, vaccinated or not, the local health authority may cause the animal to be confined for 10 days. Any costs associated with the confinement shall be an expense of the animal's owner. Such health authority may, subject to the approval of the owner, if known, cause the animal to be destroyed immediately and have the animal's head submitted to a laboratory approved by the State Commissioner of Health for examination. The dog, cat, ferret, or domestic livestock whose ownership cannot be determined may be confined for 10 days under the direction of the local health authority. Any costs associated with this confinement shall be at the expense of the party seeking this confinement. Confinement of the animal in any case shall be subject to conditions and instructions under the control of such persons, including the owner if ascertainable, that the local health authority determines will reasonably assure the continued confinement of the animal for the prescribed 10-day period. So there's a confinement period, not killing it, but continuing. Should the confined animal develop signs of rabies within the 10-day period, it shall be destroyed under the direction of the local health authority and submitted to a laboratory approved by the State Commissioner of Health for examination. Did it show signs of rabies? I don't know. They killed him immediately. Bats and any animal other than a dog, cat, ferret, or domestic livestock suspected of being rabid shall not be held for observation and shall be destroyed immediately without injury to the head and may be submitted upon approval of the local health authority to a laboratory approved by the State Commissioner of Health for examination. Technically, DEC didn't do anything wrong. They acted according to the law. Actually, let me change that. Technically, they acted according to the law. Whether they did something wrong depends on your interpretation of the situation. According to the codes, they enforced them. You know what codes don't get enforced in New York? The ones that say that when you are placing a lien or warrant on somebody's business, that you make sure that you're sending it to the right address, or that it's actually valid. That you could like double check and see that you actually received my tax check 4 years before you issued the fucking lien. You know what's not enforced? Giving people their licenses when they've paid for them. This man hadn't gotten his updated license yet. He said he was in the process. You know what that process is like? I've paid for licenses in New York City. Do you know what happens when you pay for a fucking license a year ahead of time? You don't receive it. And when you call them or email them to figure out what the fuck is going on, they don't tell you jack shit. And at the end of the day, that's funny. Lewis is getting his business. It's a repair shop that's getting fucked with a small. He's mad all the time. It's funny because they're fucking with a human. At the end of the day, the worst thing that happens when they do all this bullshit is I lose my company. But I'm still here. They're picking on somebody their own size. They're doing it with the power of the government, but they're picking on somebody their own size. He did not have his license renewed yet. And if he was dealing with the same fucking idiots that I've had to deal with in this state, having a business for 15 fucking years, I can't blame him. I can't. You want to know what it's like to call these idiots? Listen to a 3-hour fucking phone call with someone who admits that they have never dealt with this type of case before. Listen to somebody from the Department of Consumer Affairs that literally cannot tell you how their own fucking laws work. He wasn't licensed. So his license expired. And the code says that you have the right to kill the squirrel. I've always defined character not when you're doing what you're supposed to do, not when you're doing what you're allowed to do, but rather it's how you act in situations where you have the right to be an asshole. You have you are fully justified to treat somebody like shit. What do you do in those situations? When somebody's bumped into you, do you go, what's wrong with you? Or do you go, oh, it seems like you're a little disoriented. Or, oh, no worries. Like the small things in life. What do you do when you have the right? Do you confine the animal or do you kill it? It's what you choose to enforce. It's not about the codes. It's not about what you're in the right or capable of doing. For me, it's always about what you choose to enforce and what you don't. I get audits that last many years where you find out that I don't owe 1%. I owe 0.01%. You don't go after the billionaires. You don't go after the 100 millionaires. You go after the thousandaire. That doesn't actually owe you anything. Instead of focusing on critical needs like flood mitigation, where local officials have to struggle just to get permits to clear debris-filled waterways, they're out seizing pet squirrels. I'm going to take a guess that I understand why it's so hard to get those permits. What makes this sad is that you didn't fuck with a person. You didn't fuck with a business. You fucked with an animal. And you ended its life over an anonymous complaint from a sack of shit coward. You had the right to destroy the animal immediately. It's listed in the code. But you could also confine it for a few days and seen if it showed signs of rabies. You didn't do that. You don't do the real work. 15 years. 15 years of living in that fucking neighborhood. My cat litter was never safe. But God forbid there's a squirrel in somebody's house that hasn't ever disturbed anybody. That's when you pounce. If somebody comes to my house in Texas and tries to take Mr. Clinton the cat from me, Clinton's not the one getting euthanized. That's it for today. And as always, I hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next video. Bye now. And fuck